serious threat because he was as very dynamic as you said.
He was. I mean, had Malcolm X lived, had Martin Luther King lived, had Fred Hampton lived, we would have a whole different landscape here. But they were knocking off people who were dangerous.
The words of the FBI, of Hoover's memo, which was sent to every FBI office in the country that in a major city that had a Black Panther chapter, was, we must prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the black masses. That program was hidden until some people burglarized the FBI office in Philadelphia and discovered that there was this COINTELPRO program. Now, when Fred was killed, we didn't have it.
Some people?
Yeah, they were draft resistors who did it.
There you go.
They were looking for draft files, and they found COINTELPRO. Absolutely. But anyway, I gave you a hint of this speech that we heard at the church when he got everybody motivated and
excited.
And excited. And 2 months later, there was a knock on my door at 6:30 in the morning, and it was my partner, Skip Andrew. And he knocked on my door and he said, and I opened the door, he's already in a suit and tie, and he said, the chairman's been killed. The pigs vamped on his crib this morning. And I couldn't believe it because I'd seen Fred the day before, and he'd been so alive, and he made so many other people alive. And so I kind of stuttered to Skip, well, what do I do? And he said, well, I'm going to go to the morgue to identify the body, and then we're going to the apartment. The police had left the apartment unsealed. And he said, why don't you go interview the survivors, those who aren't wounded? And they were at the local Wood Street police station. So I went to the police station that morning, and I read the first Hanrahan had orders not to allow them to talk to anybody. And I talked my way into this interview, and I interviewed the woman who was named Deborah Johnson, who's now a Kua Nayeri. And she was 8 months pregnant with Fred's child. And she was there in her bathrobe, and obviously her stomach was sticking out. And I just want to read. I wrote a book about the whole Hampton case that we pursued for 13 years. But I'm just going to read a short portion here. It was cold in the tiny windowless interview room at the Wood Street police station. I looked across the wooden table at the large bound woman with a short afro who was shaking and sobbing. Deborah Johnson's patterned nightgown outlined her protruding belly, revealing her pregnancy. Fred never really woke up, she said. He was lying there when they pulled me out of the bedroom. She paused. And then I asked, 2 pigs went back into the bedroom. One of them said, he's barely alive. He'll barely make it. I heard 2 shots. Then I heard, he's good and dead now. Fred's fiancée looked at me with sad, swollen eyes. What can you do? I couldn't think of any reply. I couldn't bring Fred back to life. So that was my introduction to the murder of Fred Hampton.
Wow. Wow. My introduction was the picture on the front page of the paper with Chicago police carrying his body out with you know what eating grins on their faces. And I didn't even know Fred Hampton at the time. I was a student at Mundelein College. Panthers came 2 days later to Mundelein, to this Catholic women's college, to talk about the assassination in no uncertain terms and rather rough language for the hallowed halls. And that picture, there was like a half a dozen cops carrying out his body, and they were laughing, and I was appalled, even though I didn't know how great this guy was. I didn't even hear him speak until after he was dead, via tapes and film, and but there was something that was so clear, that was so engineered by hatred and we've got the power, you don't, yeah, we can shoot you in your bed. And of course later it came out in the book that that Jeff just referred to is actually he's going to be here for a little while signing books if you want to buy it. It's out in paperback now.
And he'll sign all the ones we have, so if we don't sell out this morning, you'll be able to get them for
get your
the
writing arm
holidays.
ready.
It is a great read. I mean, it really is inspirational, and to read about Fred and to learn that history, because we in Chicago really pride ourselves as kind of being the center of the universe. We not only had Fred Hampton come out of here, Harold Washington in part emerged because of that, and the rising consciousness in the black community and political power, and you can tie all that together and lead it right on up to Obama being elected president. So there are direct links between Fred and the president.
Absolutely, and I think the coalition of people of the black community and the liberal white community that came together after Fred was killed to oppose it, and actually created the party and the atmosphere whereby Harold Washington could get elected mayor several years later.
Yeah, no doubt. But the most important one we did was we got Hanrahan out of office 4 short years later, and that to me was the real seed of the Rainbow Coalition in terms of voting, electorally speaking.
Yeah, the black community really
because the black community put it together, and those of us who were following their lead, they were the vanguard. Went right along with them, and I do believe a lot of people cast a Republican ballot in that election for the first and maybe only time in their lives. But we did beat Hanrahan, and Michael, I'll always remember that time. Shortly after we met, when we were starting this joint, we were walking downtown on Adams Street, and you didn't say anything to me, but you might have said, "There's Hanrahan." But that was all he said. Across the street on the other sidewalk, across traffic, was Ed Hanrahan walking by himself. And Michael yells out, "Hanrahan, we know what you did!" And Hanrahan, went like, oh, and it was like there was nowhere to hide. And all I could do was go, "Yeah," But it was a moment, and it was great that you yelled out at him. I liked that a lot because I got to say.
I remember we got close to him, and we had a little interchange.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Well, maybe who knows? My age is my.
You're making stuff up now. No. Also in this book, Jeff, you do go into the horrific details, and it's not an up thing to learn about. The terrible things that were done in our name by the government officials. I mean, they drugged Fred. They paid some poor informer $300 to give him a layout of the apartment. That guy later...
O'Neill.
Yeah.
Killed himself.
I mean, it was dastardly every step of the way. And it's not fun to learn these things about our government, about our elected officials who, we're supposed to give some kind of credit to. It's not fun to learn them, but you gotta know what's possible.
Just picking up where Katy left off, I'd always wondered that there's this photograph literally of Fred being carried out on a stretcher and the police are smiling. And I always wondered, where'd that come from? Did the police take that picture? And it was actually a roving reporter for the Daily News who was listening on the police radio when he heard about the raid, or listening on the police frequency, and he rushes over there and he got that picture.
An incredible picture.
And it's amazing. And what followed was Hanrahan goes public and says that the police were merely serving a search warrant and the Panthers opened fire. And 3 times they kept firing at the police. And I think his words were, "It was lucky that none of our men were killed." Not only were they not killed, they didn't have a bruise and they didn't get hit by this continuing barrage of shots that Hanrahan described.
Tell him how many.
I think it turned out there was 91 shots fired, only 1 at most from the Panthers. The other 90 were in the direction of the people inside. And the one Panther shot was probably fired after Mark Clark had received a fatal bullet wound in the heart, because the shot went up in the ceiling. It wasn't like if you were shooting at somebody, you would shoot in the ceiling. So it took a while for this to unravel. And Hanrahan, he's a name that's lost, but Hanrahan was the heir to the early Mayor Daley. He wasn't just a young, ambitious guy.
Right.
He was
being courted for the next mayor, right?
He had been to Harvard. He had been the U.S. attorney. Now he was the state's attorney. And yeah, he was going to be the next mayor of Chicago. And
but no, thanks to you.
Right, and his career was based on a war on gangs and on that kind of mentality. So one thing the police did, they didn't seal the apartment.
Yeah.
So
that was great for people's consciousness. Tell us about those lines and lines of people for days going through there.
And so the Panthers had the sense of the time and the importance. They organized tours and they took people through the apartment, and you could see from the bullets. You can tell an entry bullet hole is smaller than an exit bullet hole, and the exit is frayed towards the direction the bullet is going. So they took hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of people, freezing weather, through that apartment. And the apartment looked sort of like cardboard. I mean, it was tiny, it was fragile, and yet you could see the mattress where Fred was killed. And Mike Gray made a wonderful documentary called The Murder of Fred Hampton. And Skip, my partner, had the presence of mind to walk in that apartment with a filmmaker and a minister, so that when he gathered the evidence that showed it was the police who fired, it was filmed, and you had a minister there saying, they picked up this bullet in this corner and put it in this bag. I've never understood how the rest of us were so shocked and stunned that he had the presence of mind to gather evidence that way.
Well, you also took the bed, the mattress out.
We did.
As I recall, Jimmy Cartier, some of the early angry guys. Where did it go? Where is it stored? I think it's probably at the DuSable Museum now.
It is. It is. It was put in a church, actually, for a while, because we were afraid the police would change the evidence, and the same with the front door.
Yeah, I was going to say the front door was the big one, because those guys were pointing to nails.
Well, the police really botched their end of it, and it makes you wonder about how many other cases they've botched in history.
Exactly. They were thinking they could get away with it. They were thinking that the public wasn't paying
like
attention.
The Republicans not paying attention to the rising tide of conscious Latinos, blacks, gay people, the whole deal.
It is interesting to juxtapose then and now, because when you talk about Hanrahan making his career on fighting gangs, and we are faced with what we are faced in Chicago right now, which is basically an endless stream of gunfire and murders by young blacks on other young blacks, mostly at this point in time, and a police force that is a lot less horrific in general. I think we can say that's true. Scrambling, literally this week, scrambling the commanders around and to figure out how to deal with it. I keep wondering when anybody's going to go for the guns. I mean, when I grew up, gangs beat each other up with fists, knives, chains. Everybody survived.
Radio aerials on cars.
Yeah. But
you know what? I'd like to suggest that we take a short musical break. We listen to the Swan Silvertones.
And we let people know they're listening to.
Just do a little meditation on Fred Hampton while we listen to this. And then we'll be back with more Live from the Heartland. We're here with Jeffrey Haas, who wrote the wonderful book, The Assassination of Fred Hampton. We'll make a few announcements. We might have some other people come on up. But right now, we've got a good discussion going with Jeff, taking a little musical break. You're listening to the Live